Lego has a problem, and it's a problem with space. Okay, no, not actually outer space. It's actually a problem with physical space in the new sets that have been released recently, within the past few years. I've noticed a trend well over the last decade, in fact, nearly two, where Lego sets tend to get smaller, more dense, but still pack a lot of parts. This is not always a bad thing, but sometimes I almost found it feeling like a premium when part of my money went towards nothing. What do I mean by that? Well, here's the thing. Recently, Lego revealed a fantastic looking set. In this one right here, the Ideas Dungeons and Dragons set. Feels like it's a long time coming, to be honest, and though I am not someone who is particularly familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, I know it is a beloved franchise, and this seems good at first glance. However, I look at this set and I cannot help but to be bothered by the size, the footprint of this set overall. Reading some of the information that I found online says that it is 30 centimeters by 37 centimeters in length and width, or depth. And that's okay. I mean, that's over a square foot, sure. But it's also like $370 something here in the US. It's a lot. Now, there are a lot of pieces here, don't get me wrong, well over 3,000, in fact, nearly 4,000 pieces, but that also includes a lot of small parts. I'm looking at the barbs on that dragon, for example, which the dragon build in and of itself looks incredible. I do recognize some familiar building techniques used in other places they have been seen before, so it's by no means a new build or anything, but it's sort of advancing on things that have been done before. However, this is not a critique of the dragon. It's not really even a critique of the build in its individual parts, but as a whole. Most of this comes down to, as I mentioned, that footprint, but also not just the footprint. It's the density of this build. This build looks wonderful for all intents and purposes. However, this is a build that I imagine is probably geared at most for adults, because it's Dungeons & Dragons themed, which is obviously a franchise that is enjoyed widely by teens and adults alike worldwide, but also because of its price point. I sure can look at the box to see what age they recommend, but that's not the point of this. At the end of the day, Lego is a toy, and I feel like there is a premium that comes with nothing. What do I keep referring to when I say nothing? Here's what I'm talking about. Back in 2005, we got this legendary set from the Lego Vikings line. This one right here, you'll notice that there's something kind of peculiar about it. I was going to say particular, and that would also work. Empty space. Literally paying for nothing. Not really nothing, of course. This set, I believe, was around $70 when it came out. Over 1,000 pieces, which, roughly for that time frame was a pretty good deal overall. But it's also a fairly large set. I had the privilege of seeing this set at a local brick resale shop here recently, and it's a quite large set overall. It's kind of imposing. And yeah, though the build in and of itself doesn't inspire the mind greatly, at the end of the day, it's just a wooden fort using a lot of the same techniques, a lot of the same builds over and over again. That's fine. But something else that kids have is imagination, and something else they have is not just Legos, not that brand loyalty that adults may have. And so oftentimes kids will play with these items along with other toys like Hot Wheels or Transformers. And I don't know if you're like me, but when you were a kid, you may have grown up with a small rug in your room with a lot of road prints all over it, or various variations thereof. And oftentimes I'd play with like my Bionicle or other builds on there and use that as, well, at the very least, a pathway. I never really treated it as though my Bionicles were playing in a city, but at the very least it could insinuate where they were going to go. Obviously, I took this further as I grew up using chalk outside on the carport or on the porch or on the driveway or even in my basement on the concrete floors, literally just drawing where the characters were going or where they were interacting. But this isn't really something that is incentivized much by Lego these days. Now, that's not to say that they don't have builds like this anymore. They definitely have some, mostly aiming more towards facades than full-on surrounds like this one here. But this obviously is not the only one that I think is well known. When we look over at Exoforce back from 2006, this is a very similar story here. And it's not just that these are fortresses. You can look at this and say, well, there's gaps in it. Characters get through. But that's the point of imagination. They weren't just fortresses, though. They were fortresses that served a purpose. In this case here, fending off the bad guys, keeping those bad guys out. And you could argue even with the last one that we saw, the dragon, keeping the dragon out. Yes, he can fly, but we can ignore that for a few minutes. Again, imagination. So when I look at a set like this, as lovely as it seems, as much effort as was poured into it by its designers, I can't help but feel let down. Not because of this set in particular. I don't have a problem with sets like this existing, in fact. However, I do have a problem when more and more sets go in this direction specifically. I think that there is this sort of friendly market space for items that give you nothing. And by nothing, I mean nothingness, openness, vastness, emptiness. Emptiness that can be filled by your imagination, both in part of, well, not seeing characters there, not seeing builds there, nothing is there to tinge what is going on in your mind, so it's up to you to fill in that blank space. But we lose a lot of that here. In regard partially just to, well, tiles on the roof and tiles all over the ground and stuff. And though I don't see too much of that here, thankfully, it is definitely there in a nutshell, right? So we see the parts count go up and up and up, and we pay that price. But what are we paying for? Something that's going to be this big on a table. And it's a tall set, don't get me wrong. It looks, again, lovely. But what are the builds we're looking at here? Part of a castle wall or some sort of fortification and a small tavern or build of some kind. It looks great. That's all it is. I'm sure that people will get countless of hours of fun out of a set like this. Like I said, I believe that this is geared towards adults, and I don't even think it's necessarily the point to try and create something that is a surround, a fortress for adults specifically. I think it's something that you see a lot more for kids because kids are typically more imaginative. But it never hurts, you know? Expanding this a little bit further, I wanted to talk about something else because I am complaining right now about a set like this being too small for the money you pay, but there's also such a thing as being too big for the money you pay. This set right here, which I know is not fully in frame, is a Liber crane made for Lego Technic that doesn't even break 3,000 pieces and yet costs a whopping $700 here in the US. And I can't get behind that. Here's the thing. It is the tallest Lego Technic set I believe we've ever received. But is that enough? Is that the justification that we're getting for a set like this being so expensive? Is it enough to say that, oh yeah, this set comes with 18 or 20 or 30 or 50 frames, but each one's $10? Like, where did we go wrong with something like this? You see, the point of this video is not to say that bigger is always better. But sometimes that nothing yields something, gives way to something, imagination. You'll note that the set, like the fortress that was made for Vikings, as I mentioned, about $70 for over 1,000 pieces, just over. And of course, the Sentai fortress for Exoforce being roughly $100 for 1,500 pieces. Now, obviously, inflation is a thing, but that's kind of what I want again. I want to look back, and I understand that Lego's building strategy has changed over the past decade, 2 decades, or more, honestly. And we don't get sets as vast, as open as they used to be. Many sets often have many points in which they are structurally reinforced at the cost of that parts count, of course. But when those parts counts go up, you tend to pay for it. No, what I would like to see, the best of both worlds in my opinion, is that these structural pieces are used, maybe even through Technic, which is typically going to be a bit stronger in 3 dimensions than a standard Lego set with less pieces involved overall. But seeing parts like that embraced, builds like that embraced, openness embraced, because I think there's a place on the market for it. It's not every set that needs to be big, that needs to be a full-on fortress. And it's not every set that needs to be empty, lending to your imagination. But some is always better than none. And I feel like we're getting too far away from that. We're getting past that point of imagination when it comes to Lego. I think this is something that I could speak to further in a separate video all on its own. So I'm going to go ahead and probably end this one here. But I did want to say that if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because it does help the channel out. And of course, it helps with the algorithm. Something else you can do for that algorithm is open the discussion down in the comments below. It's also all free. So you're literally just benefiting me out of the goodness of your heart. And I appreciate that. Of course, just watching is good enough for me. But if you do want to take the conversation further, check out the Discord, Instagram, or Patreon in the description, all of which helps out as well. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.